Karath had always walked with his head high. Among his people he was known as a warrior, strong, disciplined, and proud. 4 years he had trained, carrying the traditions of his ancestors like an unshakable shield. To him, honor was everything. It was not just about fighting. It was about how one lived, how one carried themselves in front of others. Pride was the heart of his world, and Karath believed his flame could never be dimmed. But pride, once cracked, is not easy to mend. The downfall came not in a fair fight but in a cruel display. A group of rivals, bigger and louder than him, decided to test his strength, not to honor him but to humiliate him. They cornered him in the training circle, jeering and taunting, each word sharper than a blade. Karath tried to fight back, but it was not a duel. It was a game for them. They struck when he was unprepared, mocked when he stumbled, and laughed when he fell. The crowd around them did not stop it. Some looked away, but most only laughed harder. For Karath, the pain of their blows was nothing compared to the sound of that laughter. When the rivals finally left him lying on the ground, the circle was no longer a place of respect. It was a stage of shame. He pushed himself up slowly, but no one offered him a hand. Children whispered, elders shook their heads, and his fellow warriors smirked as if his fall proved he was never worthy at all. The weight of that moment pressed onto his chest, and he felt something inside him break. After that day, Karatha's life was never the same. He still walked the paths of his people, but the fire in his stride was gone. His shoulders slumped, his eyes no longer burned with pride. Everywhere he went, he could hear echoes of laughter, even when no one spoke, even when the streets were quiet. He ate in silence, trained in silence, and lived in silence. Once, children had looked at him with admiration. Now they pointed and whispered. Once, his fellow warriors had greeted him with respect. Now they ignored him, or worse, reminded him of his fall with casual jokes. To his people, he was no longer Karath the warrior. He was Karath the broken one. But the deepest wound was not in how others saw him, it was in how he saw himself. He replayed that day again and again, asking what he could have done differently. Could he have stood taller? Could he have ignored their taunts? Could he have shown more strength? The questions circled endlessly, but they never brought peace. So Karath carried his shame like a chain. He still woke each morning, still trained his body, still went through the motions of a warrior's life. But inside he felt hollow. He no longer believed in himself, and for a warrior, that was the cruelest wound of all. And though he did not yet know it, this broken pride was the very thing that would one day lead him to the humans. Karatha's days grew heavier after his fall. Though the bruises on his body healed, the wounds in his spirit stayed open. His people had little patience for weakness, and every glance reminded him of what he had lost. So when he was assigned to work at a distant outpost with humans, he felt no pride in the task. It was not a reward. It was exile. The outpost was a small settlement carved into the edge of a barren world. Harsh winds blew across the dust, carrying the sting of sand into every crack of metal and stone. The work was endless, moving supplies, repairing equipment, and keeping the mines running. Karath thought of it as punishment. To serve among humans, a species most in the galaxy dismissed as fragile and unremarkable, only deepened his shame. He expected the humans to be meek, silent, and fearful in his presence. He was still a towering figure compared to them, his body built from years of training in war. But what he saw surprised him. One morning, as Karath carried a crate of tools, he noticed a man working nearby. The human was lean, with rough hands and tired eyes, yet he moved with a steady rhythm. His name was Ethan, and though the labor was grueling, he never complained. He did not stare at Karath with fear or mock him like others had. Instead, when their eyes met, Ethan gave him a small nod as if they were equals. It unsettled Karath. Later that day, Karath watched as Ethan struggled with a machine. The wind had blown sand into the gears, jamming the system. Many would have called for help, but Ethan knelt down, rolling up his sleeves, and worked at it patiently. When his hands bled from the sharp edges, he wiped them on his shirt and kept going. By the time the machine roared back to life, his face was streaked with dirt and sweat. Yet he smiled, not with arrogance, but with quiet satisfaction. Karath found himself staring. Here was no warrior, no soldier, and yet Ethan carried himself with a kind of strength Karath did not understand. Days passed, and Karath began noticing more. Ethan and another worker, a woman named Claire, often took the hardest shifts without complaint. They shared food with those who had none, encouraged the weak, and laughed even when exhaustion weighed on their shoulders. Karath had been taught that laughter was for the victorious, but these humans laughed even in struggle. One evening, when the sky turned red with dust storms, Karath sat apart from the workers, his silence heavy. Ethan walked over and sat beside him without invitation. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Ethan said, "You look like a man carrying too much weight." His voice was calm, not mocking. Karath did not answer. But something in the human's tone, gentle, steady, free of judgment, made him stay. For the first time since his humiliation, someone had spoken to him not as a fallen warrior, but as a person. Karath could not name the feeling, but a small spark flickered inside him. Karath had lived many seasons with the weight of shame pressing on his shoulders. But the days he spent at the outpost slowly began to feel different. The humans around him were not like his own people. They did not measure worth by strength in battle. They did not speak only of victory and failure. Instead, they carried on with their lives, even when hardship never left their side. One evening after the work shift ended, Karath sat near the supply crates, silent as always. The sun was sinking behind the dusty horizon, painting the sky in dull shades of red. Ethan, who had worked the whole day repairing broken pipes, came over and dropped down beside him. His clothes were torn at the sleeves, his hands scraped raw, but he still carried that same calm presence. "You know," Ethan said, his voice thoughtful, "back on Earth my grandfather used to tell me stories. Not about battles or victories but about survival. About people who lost everything and still stood back up." Karath turned to look at him. "Why speak of loss? What pride is there in being broken?" Ethan gave a faint smile. "Because being broken isn't the end. My grandfather worked in the mines during a time when his people were poor. He was beaten down by the world again and again, but he kept standing. He said every scar was proof that he endured. That's where pride comes from, not from never falling but from rising after you do." The words unsettled Karath. His people believed honor was only kept if one never stumbled. But here was a human telling him the opposite. Claire joined them soon after, carrying 2 cups of water. She handed one to Karath without hesitation. "My grandmother raised 3 children alone," she said with a quiet laugh. "She had no wealth, no help, and no strength to fight anyone. But she worked every day, never giving up, never letting the world take away her dignity. That's honor too, isn't it?" Karath stared at the 2 humans, their faces calm but steady. They were not boasting, not mocking him, just sharing their truth. He felt something stir in him, a thought that both confused and troubled him. Could honor really be rebuilt? Could dignity return even after being shattered? Over the next few weeks, Karath observed them more closely. When the storms hit and the work became harder, Ethan and Claire did not falter. They pushed on, helping others, always finding a way forward. When food was scarce, they shared what little they had. When others were tired or angry, they offered encouragement instead of cruelty. And when exhaustion weighed them down, they still laughed together, as if no hardship could steal their spirit. Karath could not look away. To his people, laughter after defeat was unthinkable. But the humans showed him a different way. Their strength was not in the arm or the blade. It was in the heart. One night Ethan looked at him again and said softly, "Honor isn't something anyone gives you, Karath. It's something you rebuild with your own hands." And for the first time in a long while, Karath wondered if maybe, just maybe, his broken pride was not the end of his story. The outpost had grown quiet under the heavy wind. Dust storms were common on that world, but this day brought a different storm, one Karath had hoped never to face again. The same rivals who had broken his pride years ago arrived at the outpost. They had been sent to inspect supplies, but Karath knew the truth the moment he saw their faces. They weren't here for work. They were here for him. The leader of the group, taller and broader than the rest, stepped forward with a cruel smile. "So, the great Karath has been reduced to guarding humans?" he sneered. The others laughed, their voices sharp and familiar. The words stabbed deeper than any blade. Karath froze where he stood. His chest tightened and old memories rushed back, the circle, the laughter, the shame. His hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. He told himself he was stronger now, but doubt still chained him. The bullies circled him, mocking him with every step. "Do you still remember how quickly you fell?" one of them asked. Another added, "Perhaps the humans can teach you to beg, since you are no warrior anymore." Karath's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. His silence only fed their laughter. It was then that Ethan stepped forward. The human was far smaller than the towering aliens, but his eyes were steady. He looked at them without fear, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough." The laughter stopped for a moment, replaced with disbelief. The leader turned to Ethan, towering over him. "And what will you do, little human? You think your kind matters here?" Ethan did not flinch. "I think cruelty is the weapon of the weak. If you were truly strong, you wouldn't need to break others to feel powerful." Karath's heart pounded. He wanted to speak, to act, but his doubts chained him still. Yet as he watched Ethan, something began to stir within him. This human with no weapons and no armor, stood taller in that moment than Karath had in years. The bullies laughed again, but it was different now, uneasy, almost forced. One reached out as if to shove Ethan aside, but before the hand could land, Karath moved. For the first time since his humiliation he stood between them and their target. His voice rumbled, not with fear but with something new. Enough. The rivals sneered, but Karath did not step back. He could still feel the chains of doubt pulling at him, but Ethan's courage had lit a spark that would not die. For too long Karath had lived in silence, letting others define his worth. Now, as the bullies challenged him again, he realized something important. This was not about the past anymore. This was about who he chose to be now. When the leader stepped forward to strike, Karath met him head-on. The fight was no longer a game of humiliation. It was a battle for his spirit. The air was thick with tension. The outpost workers had gathered, some hiding behind supply crates, others watching in silence. The bullies stood tall and certain, confident that Karath would crumble as he had once before. For a moment even Karath feared they were right. But then he remembered Ethan's steady voice, and Claire's stories of resilience. He remembered the laughter of the humans even when the storms tore through the camp, their strength in moments when most would break. Something burned inside him now, not the old fire of arrogance, but a new flame, lit by the humans who had shown him another way. The leader lunged forward, swinging a heavy arm meant to knock him down. Karath blocked it, the impact rattling through his bones, but he did not fall. He pushed back, stronger than he had felt in years. The bullies came at him one after another, but this time Karath was not fighting for their approval. He was not fighting to protect the pride he had once lost. He was fighting for something deeper, for his own spirit, and for the humans who had reminded him of his worth. The clash was fierce, but Karath no longer heard the cruel laughter. He no longer saw himself lying broken in the circle of shame. All he heard now was Ethan's voice echoing in his mind, "Honor isn't given. It's rebuilt." One by one his rivals began to fall back, their arrogance shaken. The leader snarled and charged again, but Karath met him with unshaken resolve. With a final push he sent the bully crashing to the ground. Silence filled the outpost. Karath stood tall, breathing hard, dust clinging to his skin. But he did not raise his fists in victory. He simply stood, his chest steady, his eyes clear. For the first time in a long while he did not feel broken. He felt whole. The bullies scrambled up, their pride wounded, and left without another word. The silence they left behind was quickly filled with the voices of the humans. Claire let out a relieved laugh and Ethan walked forward, his face calm but proud. He placed a hand on Karath's arm and said, "You see? You were never truly defeated. You just needed to stand again." Those simple words carried more weight than any praise Karath had ever known. Around them, the humans looked at him with respect, not because he had won a fight, but because he had chosen to rise after being broken. Karath felt something shift inside him. His pride was no longer tied to the shallow standards of his people. It was rooted in something stronger, the knowledge that dignity lives in the soul, not in the eyes of others. That night, as the dust storm settled and the outpost grew quiet, Karath sat with Ethan and Claire. For the first time he allowed himself to laugh with them. It was not the laugh of victory but of freedom. And as the stars stretched above the barren sky, Karath knew the truth. His spirit had been rekindled not by warriors but by humans. Their flame of resilience had lit his own, and it was a fire no storm could ever put out.